and who was a hunter, who loved the plains and the valleys and the cool nights on the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro. In September 1939, war had begun in Europe, and he had travelled over the country to Nairobi and was training to be a pilot with the RAF. He was doing quite well, but after 5 weeks he got into trouble because he took his plane up and flew off in the direction of Nakuru to look at the wild animals, when he should have been practicing spins and turns. While he was flying there, he thought he saw some rare animals, became excited, and flew down low to get a better view of them. He flew too low and damaged the wing, but he managed to get back to the airfield in Nairobi. After 6 weeks, he was allowed to make his first cross-country flight on his own, and he flew off from Nairobi to a little town called Eldoret, 2,000 meters up in the highlands. But again he was unlucky. This time he had engine failure on the way, due to water in the fuel tanks. He kept calm and made a beautiful forced landing without damaging his aircraft, not far from a little hut which stood alone on the highland plain, with no other building in sight. That is lonely country up there. He walked over to the hut, and there he found an old man living alone, with only a small garden of sweet potatoes, some brown chickens, and a black cow. The old man was kind to him. He gave him food and milk and a place to sleep, and the pilot stayed with him for 2 days and 2 nights, until a rescue plane from Nairobi found his aircraft, landed beside it, found out what was wrong, went away and came back with clean petrol, which enabled him to take off and return. But during his stay, the old man, who was lonely and had seen no one for many months, was glad of his company and of the opportunity to talk. He talked a lot, and the pilot listened. He talked of his lonely life, of the lions that came in the night, and of the elephant that lived over the hill in the west, of the heat of the days, and of the silence that came with the cold at midnight. On the second night he talked about himself. He told a long, strange story, and as he told it, it seemed to the pilot that the old man was lifting a great weight off his shoulders by telling it. When he had finished, he said that he had never told that to anyone before, and that he would never tell it to anyone again. But the story was so strange that the pilot wrote it down as soon as he got back to Nairobi. He wrote it in his own words, although he had never written a story before. Of course, he made mistakes because he didn't know any of the tricks that writers use. But when he had finished writing, he left a rare and powerful story. We found the story in his suitcase 2 weeks later, when we were packing his things after he had been killed in training. The pilot seemed to have had no relatives, and because he was my friend, I took the story and looked after it for him. This is what he wrote. The old man came out of the door into the bright sunshine, and for a moment he leaned on his stick and looked around him. He stood with his head on one side, looking up, listening for the noise which he thought he had heard. He was small and over 70 years old, although he looked nearer 85 because of illness. His face was covered with grey hair, and when he moved his mouth, he moved it only on one side of his face. On his head, indoors or outdoors, he wore a dirty white hat. He stood quite still in the bright sunshine, his eyes